Welcome to tonight's Virtual Views with Garrett Bradley. I'm Thelma Golden, Director and Chief Curator at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Tonight's program is in celebration of Garrett's amazing exhibition, Projects, Garrett Bradley at MoMA, part of the multi-year partnership between the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Museum of Modern Art and MoMA PS1. Together, our institutions continue to work on a series of programs and exhibitions building on a history of collaboration and shared values while the Studio Museum's new home is under construction. Projects Garrett Bradley was organized with my colleague Legacy Russell, Associate Curator at the Studio Museum. Hello, Garrett.
Hi, Thelma.
I am so thrilled to speak with you tonight. We are here to talk about your incomparable work, America. But first, a brief introduction. Garrett Bradley is an artist and filmmaker working across narrative, documentary, and experimental modes of filmmaking. Her work addresses ideas of race, class, familial relationships, social justice, Southern culture, and the history of film in the US. Often her films explore the space between fact and fiction, embracing modes of representing history that blurs the boundaries between traditional notions of narrative and documentary cinema. In 2019, she received the Philip Guston Rome Prize for America. In 2020, she became the first Black woman to win the Directing Award in the US documentary category at the Sundance Film Festival. She's been included in the Whitney Biennial and has had her work shown at the Sundance Film Festival, New Orleans Museum of Art, Brooklyn Academy of Music, Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, and so many more venues. We gathered questions from MoMA members over the last few days, so we'll be addressing some of those throughout the evening. We'll also be taking questions live, so please send us your questions via the YouTube live chat, and our amazing producers will pass them along to Garrett and me. Shall we begin?
Yes.
Garrett, please share with us a bit of your journey as a filmmaker, as an image maker, and as an artist. How did you come to make this piece? And how did this piece become a part of you?
Well, first of all, Thelma, I just want to say it is such an incredible honor to be talking with you and to have brought this work across, as you said, institutions. And I just want to thank you for that. And also thank everyone who's watching tonight for taking the time. Briefly, I guess I'll say, I feel really fortunate to have been able to figure out how I wanted to contribute to the world at a relatively young age. I started experimenting with taking pictures and playing with a Hi8 camcorder and really not being like a cinema head. Sometimes you talk to people and they're talking about like Tarkovsky at like 20 years old. I wasn't one of those people. I was just kind of playing around, figuring out my own language. It's sort of a gendered experience at this point, I think, but I mention it because I think especially I'm always thinking about young people who are maybe watching these things, who are figuring out how they come to fruition as artists and as image makers. And I really had to kind of figure out myself on my own. When I was in high school, a lot of the guys were really good at coming together, helping each other out, making films. And a lot of the girls were like more independent and kind of doing their own thing. And so I kind of had to develop a process and methodology that would allow me to express myself the way that I wanted to. And I think that methodology, even in its solitude, really stayed with me up until this point, even now that I have the privilege of being able to work with large groups of people and teams, and knowing, of course, that filmmaking is an inherently collaborative process. There were certain works I remember that were like really sort of seminal to my believing in myself and feeling like I could make something. And that really started actually pretty late in my life when I was in graduate school at UCLA. And I had an opportunity to meet Billy Woodbury, who was a part of what they call the LA Rebellion, which is sort of a problematic term, in my opinion. It's really neo-realistic cinema that was brought to America and was sort of rediscovered specifically in a Black American context. And what that means is making films by all means necessary with the resources that are available to you, often in exterior settings with non-professional actors. And I saw Charles Brunet's film Killer of Sheep, which, you know, for me was like, it was like an odd coming home to oneself. I think when you see something where you're like, wow, that doesn't fit into the trajectory that I thought only existed. This is both experimental, it's challenging the form, it's pushing the form, it's dealing with history and the present moment all at once. And that was crucial for me. And so I guess, you know, just skipping way ahead to like 2014, I remember reading an article in the New York Times Magazine that MoMA had discovered this first film, starring an all-Black cast and had an integrated production team. And Burt Williams was at the center of that, who was making more money than the president at his time. And, you know, it was really significant. This was made in 1913. And so that was just several years, historically speaking, after Plessy versus Ferguson, which happened in 1896, which was the beginning of Jim Crow. It was also the same year that the modern day projector was invented. And so the fact that you had white people and Black people working together towards a Black vision was really significant. And those were some of the first things that stood out to me. And actually, I'm looking at this image right now where you see Burt and Odessa Gray on a merry-go-round. And this was one of the first things that stood out to me, actually, of really being inspired to make America, because it might look like a familiar shot to you all, actually. And it's very close to, and it might even be the same shot as what Spike Lee is known for, as the double dolly, where you have basically both the subject and the camera on the same fixed thing. And there's this incredible tension between what's static and what is moving. And so I really, you know, without talking too much, I'll just say that like part of what brought me to making America was thinking about how this one film that was found in 1913 presented so many possibilities for what we don't know. And so America is looking at a visual chronology of histories and individuals that are lesser known over the course of 12 years.
Right. And it seems that the sort of critical piece here, because this seems to be, on the one hand, a pure act of serendipity, right? That you saw this film, but yet it placed you in the context of this lost history. Right. So what we understand is that 70% of all feature-length films made in the US between 1912 and 1929 don't exist. And it was in this finding, right, the being found, the finding being found, that then you experienced this work to inspire America that you made. You have said that America is sort of a grandiose title. But I don't want to shy away from what it would mean to title the film after my country, because the impetus for this was to visually illustrate inclusivity and make a case for the beauty of what that could mean. What does the title mean to do when you finish the work and now? And can you talk a little bit about what I know was perhaps the inspiration for thinking of taking on America as a title?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny because your question, there's so many different entry points at this point, just given the inauguration, given where we are in this present moment, what it means to be American, what the definitions of that are. I think first and foremost, you know, when you look at someone like Glenn Ligon's work, right, I feel like there's a very obvious connection that I would be remiss not to discuss, which is this idea of the word itself, the symbol of what America means, the reflection, the definition, the fixed definition, and forcing flexibility within that definition of what America is, right? Both in its literal sense on the wall, as well as the reflections that are created on the ground, right? When you look at his work. And that, to me, was something that evoked the same kind of spirit of what I felt Burt was doing in 1913. Mm-hmm. And what I was really interested in doing in a more kind of digital sense, actually, which is that you make work and nowadays, and it ends up on the internet, you know, whether it's meant to exist in real space or not, it will have a life on the internet. And so I liked the idea of sort of disrupting the algorithm and the images that pop up when one types in America. How do we resurface? How do we prove our existence in a way in which we see ourselves? And to me, there were so many exciting possibilities far beyond even this work itself, that could create echoes and ripple effects throughout the internet, throughout space and time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. No, that's really, really powerful. I know that one of the specific points of inspiration was the imagining you did about what lime kiln meant when it was created, but what it could mean to us in the present day. Can you please speak about what it means to sort of find oneself, one's history, one's sense of place and possibility in moving image?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny because when you watch traditional films, um, I think we kind of take for granted, and that's by design, that's on purpose, but we take for granted that we don't really have a real sense of what our relationship is to time, to that narrative. Is it taking place over the course of an hour, over the course of a day? Actually, Speed is probably the one film I can think of where it's like, what the time frame is of that film, right? With Keanu Reeves. But in general, it's actually it's really abstract. And so I think that quote unquote avant-garde filmmaking or experimental filmmaking, film that exists somehow outside of the traditional format, in many ways connects us in a more real way to time and to history, because it actually makes those gaps more visible. And I think that for me, the fact that there, as you said, 7,500 films that are missing, and there's this one film that is really progressive, both in its execution, in its narrative, in, I should say, the political hierarchy that it must have taken for Burt Williams to be in that position of having an integrated production at that time period is not to be taken for granted. How do we then look at this film and say, all right, let's just fill the gap. Let's make an assumption that there's a whole body of work that's equally as progressive as this time period. And if we have examples where we can look at the past and see ourselves as we want to see ourselves, it might also present new possibilities for how we see ourselves in the present moment, that we're not coming from a place of lack. And it also, to a certain extent, challenges, I think, notions of American cinema versus Black cinema, which is, going back to thinking about the LA Rebellion. It's like that movement didn't stop. That movement has always continued. This movement that happened in 1913 with Burt Williams, it is simultaneous, it is parallel to our understanding of American history. And so if we can really prove that to a certain extent, create evidence of it, whether it's through Google or through installation work, then our desires become real. You know what I mean? Our instincts become real, and we challenge this idea of something perpetually crashing and having to restart, which is what a movement implies.
Well, and it continues to allow us to sit within the belief of our humanity, right? In the face of everything that makes that seem not possible. Can you talk, we just had an image on the screen of the installation itself, which is in the beautiful project space at MoMA. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the choice you made in how to make this work, right? That this footage was first discovered in 1939, restored by the Museum of Modern Art in the 1980s. It's currently on view, by the way, at MoMA as well. And it makes us think about the importance of archives, but also their limitations. And what you did was sort of take the archive, but make something new about it. In what ways has the notion of archiving impacted your films and your worldview about making work?
Yeah, well, I think that I learned so much. The journey of making this project and realizing it into the world was has been so critical to my practice as a filmmaker who traditionally is working in two-dimensional space. I think that there were some inherent challenges, some things I'm now obsessed with, but some inherent challenges with working in a framework that I was used to when I started to approach this project. Because as I was mentioning, there are these truths that are maybe less implicit or less visible in the archive when you're watching it. which is that, yes, Burt Williams is wearing blackface, but no one around him is. He also was incredibly tall, and he finds a way to completely immerse himself in the group, in the crowd. And you see this incredible, palpable sense of joy and excitement that was truly happening with the cast and the crew. And I remember when I was editing, for the most part, Obama was president. And then right before it was supposed to come into the world, Trump had become president. And so the stakes for me, I felt were so much higher. I couldn't take for granted that people would understand all of these nuances that I was speaking to, right? And really what I'm saying then, what came to me was, oh, okay, so two-dimensional space, you can only tell a story or say something one frame at a time, and how limiting that can be. And not only is this a visual chronology, right? Something in which felt to me then that inherently required physicality, but it also, I think, meant that I needed to somehow show in the most literal sense how the past, how the present, how the future all collapse onto oneself, and that our perspective, our height, our curiosity, the way in which we move through space informs what we see and how we make those connections between all tenses of time. And so that is why it is the X, it's the crossroads, it's the white flag that is a surrendering, not to white supremacy, but is actually creating space for these lesser known histories. So all of those things, I think, came to me in the process of trying to think about the archive, as you say, as something that is flexible and not fixed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. In our previous conversation, that's viewable on the Studio Museum and MoMA magazine web pages, we spoke deeply about the relationship between images and memory, right? The power of memory. And it feels right to circle back to that now. Would you speak a bit about the role of images in creating a collective sense of memory and of history? How does America do the work of proposing new directions within this project, right? A large project, I would say, of creating a sense of memory, but also future making at the same time?
Yeah. I think that's also something I've been thinking a lot. I mean, it's funny. I would be so curious to know. I think a lot of artists and filmmakers right now are thinking about memory and are thinking about the past and how we sort this present moment, how we can have more control even in a positive way for the future, you know? And I think that memory for me is such an interesting thing that you can just sit and think about for long periods of time. But I truly believe, and it could be that I believe this because I'm not good at doing anything else, in my opinion, right? Like there are more overt ways of expressing information. And I've tried to, especially when you think about it in a sort of documentary context, right? Like the role of lower thirds, the role of identifying a location. Those are facts that help situate us, that help us understand what's happening, that then we remember. I've always felt like images, and I think that at the crux of this project for me is very much about this belief that images actually are facts because they stay with us, we remember them, and the things that we remember become fact in our mind over time. And I think that for me is a liberating idea because it means that there can be more people who are contributing to what the canon of facts are, you know, that we can contribute to the history books in a multitude of ways, through a multitude of languages. And so, you know, when I actually created this thing called the Inventory of Facts, which was the visual chronology that America is based off of. It starts in 1915, it goes through 1926. I wanted to start with 1915 because it was what they think to be the thing that actually thwarted Limekiln Club Field Day from actually being considered commercially viable and therefore finished. And so I liked the idea of thinking about the white sheet, of thinking about the complexity of how a sort of mundane object changes its meaning, depending on who's holding it and how it's arranged, right? And then I just went through each year and found something, in some cases that weren't overtly connected to Black history, but I felt that we could put ourselves in. So like in 1916, for instance, Woodrow Wilson established the Boy Scouts of America. The aesthetics around that, the symbols around that, the images that we associate with the Boy Scouts of America could be subverted, could evolve, could be upgraded, you know? And that then ends up, again, in the algorithm of how we understand America. And those images, you know, even if we don't know that this is connected to Woodrow Wilson or connected explicitly to the Boy Scouts of America, that image is going to be in our mind, and it becomes somehow a part of our understanding of our cultural consciousness. I hope.
Yeah. Can you dig a little deeper into the inventory of facts? Because I think that is one of the most innovative aspects of your practice, that you created this rigorous context from which to build the work. So what gave you the idea of the necessity of creating this? And can you tell our audience a bit about that process? Because I think it says so much about how you make work.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, I think that I needed to do something that was like really boring and practical and sort of just an index, right? I knew that I wanted to fill space. I knew that I needed to figure out how I was going to fill that space. I needed that space to start off in a way that was really intentional. And again, that was evoking this source material that I was so inspired by. And so that's again why I started with 1915. And I really was trying to think about how, on some level, you know, I'm also really bad at like writing scripts. And that was something that, this is an image of Bessie Coleman, who was not only the first Black woman, but first American to get an international pilot's license in 1925. And this is Donna Crump, who's a classically trained ballet dancer from New Orleans, who was one of the lead people in the film. Sorry, I'm going off for a second, but I just see this beautiful image of her. And so, yeah, so on some level, each one of these years was like, it was like one sentence, you know? Woodrow Wilson established things that were really, really simple, but that also became the script for everyone else on the team, this incredible team that helped to make this project happen. They needed to have some understanding of what we were making. And so it became not only sort of an index of a guide for us to understand how to move through time, it was also the script for the prop people, for the cinematographer, for the actors, for everybody. It's sort of the Bible. And it's also something that I think people either, you know, they can look at it and go through the work if they want to, or again, they can engage with history in a way that is a little bit more loose, you know. The modern day or the radio, actually, I'm just looking at this image, that was I think it was 1924, was when the radios became a household thing. And this is a piece from that. This is Akila, who's a student of mine in New Orleans. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we have a question from a fantastic audience member, Raj Roy. And he asks, how do you process chronology when you shape your vision of time? How important are beginnings, middles, and endings? Or do they matter at all?
I don't think, I think that they matter to the extent that we understand their relevance, you know, and we understand their connection to one another. I don't think that any tense of time matters in its singularity, actually. I think that it's really important for us to understand the totality of the universe, the holistic nature of the world, the 360 degrees that inform the things that we believe we know, and how those things that we believe we know make us feel, and how those feelings then inform how we act and how we behave. And I think that actually the working for the first time in three-dimensional space, which is what this project is, for me was again like a kind of really literal experiment and first step into trying to address that very thing.
But Garrett, when you had the idea for this project, after beginning to think about it, what made you want to make this a three-dimensional installation? And to Raj's question, in its three-dimensionality, do you imagine, as viewers encounter it, that they need to begin at a certain point, or how do you understand the experience, of this incredible kaleidoscope of images that you've created?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had experimented with, when I was editing it, I had experimented with actually having, let's say, 1915 and 1916 on top of each other as overlays on a screen, right? And it, you didn't really understand the space that existed between those things. And actually, I mean, I had experimented with taking also just all 12 of those vignettes and layering them on top of each other, again, in two-dimensional space on a screen, which now I'm like, maybe I should try that again and just see what that looks like. But it felt more, to me, it was like very practical. It wasn't about trying to make art. I think that that's for me, and maybe this is coming from a defensive place, but I didn't, as somebody who works more in traditional filmmaking, not really actually, but who works more with two-dimensional space, it wasn't that I was trying to say, how do I find a way to get into an institutional space or to a fine art space? For me, it was like, what is the intention behind this? The intention is to really try to offer people an opportunity to see how their own mind is connected to their perception of history. And so when you walk around the work, and it's four intersecting, transparent flags, right? The transparency, I think, is really important, and in that you can watch it 1 year maybe in its singularity, in the same way that your hand, my mom would always say to me, like, your hand, when it's really close to your face, you can't see the lines, you know what I mean? But the further your hand gets away from you, the more you have perspective and you can see what it is you're looking at. That's the same thing for history. That's this present moment. And then the further these years get away from us, we'll have a better understanding maybe of what today was like, right? I can't do that in two-dimensional space. I can't, or at least I haven't figured that out, and I'm sure somebody else will. But this was sort of my way of trying to allow people a space to directly engage with time, with all tenses of time, and their interconnectedness as one thing,
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about another time, that is your incredible, powerful documentary time. These two works are kind of living in the world at the same moment, but have a very different look, structure, come from a very different place. Can you talk a little bit about your documentary? I want to say for our audience that you can watch the full film of Garrett Bradley's time on MoMA's Virtual Cinema from January 21st to the 26th. But Garrett, I think, it is hard to not talk about these two works together as a way to think about this totality that you've been engaged in, but very specifically now, can you speak to us a bit about the documentary?
Yeah. Well, it was like a cosmic kind of experience actually to be making this film shortly after America, because both are kind of looking at the role that invisibility plays in understanding, being engaged with what's happening in the world. It also, I think, presented a way for me to extend this understanding of how performance specifically is a form of resistance. And I can just offer some context. I mean, Time is about one family's 2-decade fight to reunite themselves amidst the prison industrial complex. There's 2.3 million people that are incarcerated in our country. There's, if not double, triple, quadruple that number then that are affected if you think about their loved ones. The system is something that is invisible by design. It's very difficult, I think, even for most people to fathom what 2.3 million people plus all of their loved ones actually looks like. It's actually quite that again, it goes back to this thing of a fact or a number becoming very abstract to a certain extent, right? And so the role that images play and seeing becomes so crucial for us creating a more just and transparent world. I, you know, part of the journey, even just, I should mention, with Angola, which is in Louisiana, which is where Robert was incarcerated for 21 years, that was made up of multiple plantations that was then consolidated into one plantation, that was then turned into a prison, that was nicknamed after the people who were enslaved, that were brought from the country of Angola. It's 18,000 acres of land. And the prison, of course, would not allow us in there to film. So we had to find other ways to even see that space. And our drone was only able to get a fraction of that 18,000 acres. So I think that this speaks again to the same themes that I was grappling with, even with America, of this entire body of work that is missing. And how do we use optics and image making, how do we think about image culture as a way to offer justice, you know? And I think that the archive too, so Fox, I should just mention, you know, I made this film thinking I was making a 13-minute short film, a sister film to Alone, which was a 13-minute film I did with the New York Times Op Docs that was also looking at incarceration from a sort of inherently Black feminist point of view. And I didn't know that Fox had 100 hours of a personal archive, which she then handed to me on our last day of filming, and really became this incredible opportunity for there to be a weaving and a conversation, not only between my camera and her camera, but I think offered in the same way that this installation is 360 degrees, it offered a 360-degree experience actually in two-dimensional space in a way that I myself couldn't exactly figure it out, but that Fox clearly was able to offer. And it was another opportunity for me to think about archive as something that is flexible, as something that offers the totality of our life, and that it isn't just one frame at a time, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I think what's so interesting and what was so inspiring to me, you know, and I have to say, and I think many people who saw your film felt this way, but that we were deeply changed by Sybil Fox Richardson, right? She is an inspiration, and understanding that her own initiative to document on behalf of herself,
Yeah.
not knowing that she would meet you, not knowing that you would do a documentary, but her sense of creating for her own family in this battle, you know, and that's how you feel her in this battle to, you know, bring justice for her husband, but really for her children, for her whole family, for her community. And that filming that she did, right, as a way to say to all of us, this is who I am, this is who we are, that you then were able to be in conversation with, I think really speaks to her, right? And what we all owe her, but also to, I think, this unique way in which you've thought about yourself, Garrett, as a filmmaker and an image maker. How is it that you imagine your role when you are in collaboration, conversation, right?
Yeah.
You know, there was almost a sort of a way in which, you know, you exist as a medium for what can be this kind of visibility that we know is necessary for justice. Can you talk a little bit about what that has meant for you as an artist?
Thank you for putting it that way, because you know, you don't always think about your relationship. I mean, I to be honest with you, I know this sounds sort of like hippy dippy and weird, but I've always felt very guided and not necessarily, I'm not going out and looking for projects. These things fall into themselves, you know? I think that, you know, in many ways, I mean, first of all, I should say that there isn't a single thing I've done that hasn't been, in my mind, a collaboration. I don't actually see how you make anything that's good that isn't a collaboration. And for me, collaboration means that there is equality, there's transparency, there's respect, there's mutual intention that is established and that is carried forth through the entire duration of the project, including when it goes out into the world and when you release it, you know, to the world. I felt actually that I was collaborating with Bert, you know, I mean, I in many ways, and he also was doing the same thing in terms of proving his existence, documenting his existence. Fox, in many ways, I felt was also redefining the American dream, which was the very thing that got them in the situation that they were in. She was also showing her version of what wholesomeness looks like. Of she was creating new iconography, new images and symbols that help to define what being an American is and what a beautiful family is. Yeah, so I think that carries across everything. And what is my, like, I don't even know if I've ever asked myself that question. I probably need to think about it tonight. Like, I just feel like that's my purpose is I feel like all of our purposes on earth are to give something, you know what I mean? And hopefully you can find a way to do that in a way that allows you to feel that you are communicating effectively, because I think our ability to communicate, to feel heard, is to feel loved, you know?
Thank you, Garrett. We're now going to take some more audience questions. This one is from Tootsie Warhol, who is a MoMA member for 13 years. So I want to say thank you, Tootsie, as a museum member, and to all museum members for your support of museums. And Tootsie asks, what are some of the best historically Black films to seek out and watch? I mean, we started with sort of the text in some ways, Killer of Sheep, but could you, for our audience and for Tootsie, give us some other films, historically Black films?
It's such a great question, actually, because to be honest with you, the first thing that comes to mind is like, even films like, isn't Gone with the Wind and Grapes of Wrath and every film that deals with the American experience a historically Black film on some level? Like, we cannot separate those things. Just because we aren't present the way that we see ourselves doesn't mean that it isn't a Black film, because I don't think that you can disconnect those things. But I will say that, you know, when I was doing research for Limekin, I was looking at a lot of films by Spencer Williams and Oscar Micheaux, which I think a lot of people know. There's this incredible couple, the Gists, Gists, who made some crazy films. And this was like pre-aesthetic, pre-tradition, right? We just saw Looking for Langston, which popped up, and which I think is an amazing see, and was also really crucial to the process in making America. I remember, I mean, it's dealing with memory, and it's dealing with what we don't see, similar to Killer of Sheep, but in a really different way that I think leans into fantasy and a certain kind of beauty that I deeply value and am sort of obsessed and fascinated by. And so when I saw that film, it was incredibly inspiring to me. The music also, so I should just mention Trevor Matheson, who did the score for that film, who was a part of the Black Audio Film Collective. That not only did I hear the music and say, okay, how do I honor this work? How do I honor this film? In a way that is also answering this question that I personally had of like what it means to make a contemporary silent film. And for me, a lot of that had to do with the sound and with the music. And that really struck me when I was watching Langston. And when I started to think about, wow, what would it mean to be able to collaborate with Trevor, who I'm incredibly fortunate that he actually answered my email and got together with me when I was in the UK briefly. I really just stalked him, and then he like agreed to let me hang out with him briefly. But his movement, the Black Audio Film Collective, you know, was also to a certain extent up against the same things I felt I was up against when Trump became president and I was finishing America, right? Like, they had Thatcher, they were working underneath the Thatcher administration, and they were also working against this idea of Black cinema being defined in any kind of explicit way around the same time that Spike was making She's Gotta Have It, right? With the double dolly. Like, it all actually like kind of falls into itself in this incredible way. Cheryl Denyer, Charles Lane, Sidewalk Stories was a film I remember seeing actually when I was really little, and the images of that film stayed with me forever. Zora Neale Hurston's films, who maybe that's not categorized as being historically Black cinema, but she did incredible field work. And a lot of those films are amazing, and I would highly recommend looking at.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question from Lenka Tattersall. And Lenka asks, one thing that really resonates for me in America is the way the motif of the circle or cycle repeats across some of the vignettes. For instance, the circular turn of a disco ball, or the rounded movements of a baseball player, swinging a bat, or the looping movement of the camera through space. Also, the installation invites viewers to walk around the work, to literally encircle it. I'm wondering if and how images of circularity or cycles figured into how you conceived America.
Beautiful question. I mean, I think that the circularity part of it is sort of what I was referring to in terms of history, like how all of these things collapse into one another, you know, that those 360 degrees are the way in which history is made. It's the way in which we understand ourselves, our past selves, our future selves, all of it. And I think for me, like being able to move around something was incredibly exciting as somebody who doesn't work in physical space that often, doesn't work in object making really, you know, and all of the possibilities that presented themselves in terms of people being able to inform their experience and to make connections that are not just about me dictating them, that one can actually make their own realizations based on their proximity to the work, you know. That to me is an incredibly exciting idea, not to mention again just the literal nature of I think how all of this works. Like the earth is round, you know. I mean, most of us believe the earth is round, you know. I do. Yeah.
Leah Dickerman asks, you spoke about the double dolly shot. Do you have shots that you see as critical to your vocabulary?
You know, I didn't think I did, and then I realized I might. I think that it's so funny because the Dutch angle is a very controversial angle. So it's like there's this, and then like this is when you Dutch something, you know? And for me, it is the most intuitive frame to a certain extent. And I don't know if that's because I feel like most of us talk like that, like when we're talking to each other, our heads are kind of moving, right? Like it makes sense. I also think it's always been important that I'm looking up at people, you know, that there's making images there's so much responsibility. It lasts longer than any idea that I have, lasts longer than me. It lasts longer even than the work to a certain extent itself in its totality, again, just as memory, as one image in your mind. And so I think that the Dutch angle has become something I've leaned on quite a lot. I also think that the zoom lens, which is something I kind of discovered a few years ago, has been a really important part of my process, in that it's something that offers both context and specificity in the same frame, you know. So it kind of actually it's sort of a workaround for that same issue I was talking about of like having to tell stories one frame at a time. You can say a lot, you know, when you start to narrow in on something. It also, I feel like, connects psychologically with focus and concentration, and when we start to feel that. So I think those are some tools that have been the way in which I've wanted to express myself. But I also feel like, you know, you get bored with yourself, and then you want to find other ways to break out of your own aesthetic, break out of the things that you're leaning on, and so you have to do different things, you know.
Always innovating. Michael Duffy says, the 3D installation is so immersive and powerful, and he encourages all to see it in person when you can. So his question is, Garrett, can you speak about how you hope a viewer would move around the installation in the gallery?
I think the beauty of it is that it's totally up to you, you know. It's completely up to you. And I've always thought about like wanting to make a film that was sort of like the Bible, you know, that you could just open it at any point and learn something from it, you know. And I don't read the Bible, but it's an example of like a text that, you know, where people can do that. But I feel like I want to be able to create a space where anyone can walk into a room, and it doesn't matter at what point in the work you're entering it or how you're moving through it. It's for you, you know, and how you want to move through that.
Great. So we have a question from Laura Lalinde. And Laura says, can you speak to the role of nostalgia in America or in the rest of your work in general? This is something we spoke about in the interview. So Laura, I hope you will look at that on the Studio Museum website and the MoMA magazine. But Garrett, can you talk about nostalgia?
Yeah, I mean, nostalgia, when I was watching Limekiln, you know, as just sort of unfiltered source material, you really feel a sense of nostalgia for the future, which is what, you know, I remember you talking about, even just being able to see that in that material. And that really struck me as a phrase, because it is, to have nostalgia for the future is more than having hope, because it's something that is active. It's something that's already happened to a certain extent, because you are manifesting, you know, like you're actively manifesting, which is what Fox, I learned so much from her about what manifesting is, to speak in terms that bring things and invoke things into action, into the present. You know, I think that there's a lot of power in that, you know, specifically for this current moment. So I'm certainly, and there's something different about that also than like sort of utopic futures, because again, it's something that's already been done. It's already been made, you know?
Yeah. No, I think I feel like when we first spoke about Limekiln, it felt to me, and I feel this every time I look at the work itself, but when I also look at the work in the context of yours, is that they were imagining us.
Yeah.
And that feeling is so profound and so powerful.
Yeah.
That at that moment, they were imagining us. And so that makes me think what we are creating now is imagining a future. And so it was that nostalgia for the future.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. We have a question from Lely Maksud, who says, I've watched America both as a single channel for a class and the installation at MoMA, and wondered if the single channel was just a screener or if it exists for a screening in cinema.
Yeah, they do exist in two different spaces. One is one you can experience in a more theatrical way, and one that, or I should say, in two-dimensional passive space, I might even say, and one that is an installation that's physical. And they're totally different edits. They really function for me in a really different way, because I think that the questions that I was trying to grapple with around simultaneity, right, were really challenging to try to do in a single screen. And so there's something that's a little bit more, it's certainly more linear, and it's certainly in the format maybe that you saw, and more traditional in that sense. And you know, maybe that's just me being greedy. I couldn't really just choose one. I did do both.
I think we're grateful for both, and for both experiences, you know, and having been privileged to begin talking to you at the beginning of the process of this piece, they do exist as two distinct but interrelated works. And I think both of them offer us something incredible. Van May asks, you talked about images becoming facts as they enter our memory. Looking at today's current images, real or not, which ones do you think are important to be archived for us to look at in the future?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that on one hand, it's really important that we create our own archives, you know, and those are things that I couldn't tell you, you know what I mean? That you know for yourself, or that your friend or your family members or anybody. I think that we have to understand that there is a really clear distinction between mainstream media and how mainstream media defines generations and defines histories for us. And that the only way to counteract that, the only way to sort of offer a more nuanced understanding of a moment or a truth, is to create that archive yourself. I have to say that I think, like, you know, over the summer, watching the protests, for me, it became all the more, I really felt like Emmett Till's mother was sort of evoked in thinking about the importance of image making and optics as holding systems accountable. When we think about the Vietnam War and the fact that people could see what was happening in war, and that also incited protest, right? And now we're kind of living in this world of the green screen. And we're also living in a world where we can't see the prison system, right? It only highlighted that for me. So I think, it's twofold. It's both a collectivizing of our own archives. It's also, in a really pointed way, looking at one of the biggest issues in our country, which is the prison system, and trying to counteract that by creating more images and visibility around what is intentionally made invisible in this current moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now we have a final question from the audience. Prue Pfeiffer asks, where are you looking today for inspiration or source material for your next projects?
I'm not sure. Being in the world has been such an important part of my process, and every one of my projects has come to me either by reading something in the newspaper or bearing witness to something that's already happening in my community with people that I know. And so in the COVID moment, music has been really important for me, actually. And I think that fundamentally, I think about making images as a place where two ideas or spaces, individuals, geographies, that might seem to be in conflict with one another, that are not in dialogue with one another in real space, can merge and can be in that gray space, can weave, right? Like, I think about the work as a conversation between sometimes these opposing elements of our life, of our daily life in our world. So I don't really, and that takes on many different shapes and forms. And I feel like everything I do is fundamentally trying to create a conversation around these two things that need to have a conversation, And so for the future, I don't know what that's going to look like, but it'll probably be another attempt at trying to do that better in some way.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine, in thinking about not just trying to do that better, I know you will, but it also seems that what you are saying is that it's so informed by your lived experience of this moment and the way in which you are walking through the world, not just as a passive participant, but as witness. Yes. And in so much, I see your work as about a kind of active witnessing. Really, almost a kind of way that witnessing in and of itself is a path towards truth and towards justice. So it feels that that's perhaps where and how, you might be taking us to the next work. And I know that I speak on behalf of those who've been able to see your work, the current work, and those of us who will get to see your work in the future, and really look forward to that. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This has been a really incredible conversation, and I am so thrilled to be here with you, Garrett. If you weren't able to catch the whole show live, this video will be up on MoMA.org immediately after the live stream ends. We have had viewers tune in from all over the world. People are joining us right now in Southern California, Colombia, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, Miami, Hell's Kitchen, the United Kingdom, Harlem, and I'm sure I'm leaving some out. Thank you all. Remember to stay up to date with everything happening at the Museum of Modern Art and the Studio Museum on our institution's websites, where you will find articles and videos about Garrett Bradley's America. Thank you, everyone, and especially, thank you, Garrett Bradley.
Thank you, Thelma. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.